Have you ever wondered what happens when fear and survival collide at the edge of the wilderness? Tonight, I'll take you to a remote mountain village where every night the same haunting sound echoed down from the ridges, the howl of wolves. The villagers believed those howls were warnings, omens of danger. Their livestock was their livelihood, and to them, wolves meant loss, hunger, and threat. But one child, just one pair of eyes, saw something no one else dared to see. In the crisp mountain air, the alpha wolf moved silently, a shadow gliding across the snow line. Its yellow eyes glowed like twin lanterns, and in its jaws hung the limp body of prey. To the villagers, this was proof of the monster that haunted their nights. To the little girl who followed quietly from behind the trees, it was something different. It was a parent carrying food back to its pups. This story begins with fear, with villagers gathering by torchlight, whispering that the only way to live in peace was to kill the alpha wolf. Imagine the tension of that night, their breath fogging in the cold fingers, gripping spears the children hidden behind shuttered windows. Every heart beat in unison with a single chilling thought: if they do not strike first, the wolves will strike them. But what if the truth was more complicated? What if the predator they feared was not their enemy, but another family fighting for survival in the same unforgiving wilderness? I want you to picture this. The villagers raise their weapons, eyes fixed on the ridge where the alpha's silhouette stands against the moon. Just as the trigger is about to be pulled, a small figure darts out into the clearing, her voice trembling, her hands lifted high. She shouts that she has seen the truth, that the wolves are not stealing from the village at all, that the alpha hunts the deer and the elk, not the cattle penned behind wooden fences. The villagers freeze. The silence is deafening. The torches crackle. The howl of the alpha carries over the valley, long and mournful, like a question thrown into the night. And what happened next shocked everyone, both man and wolf alike. High in the mountains where pine forests stretch into endless ridges and winter lingers long after spring has touched the valleys, there was a village almost forgotten by time. Wooden houses huddled together against the wind. Smoke curled from stone chimneys carrying the scent of burning spruce. Life here was hard. Families relied on their cattle, their goats, their harvest of barley and potatoes to make it through the biting cold. Among the villagers lived a young girl named Lina. She was no more than 10 years old, with dark braids that swung when she ran, and eyes that noticed what others ignored. Her father was a herder, hardened by years of watching the sky and the soil. Her mother kept the home-weaving cloth by lamplight. For Lina, the mountains were both playground and mystery. She collected feathers, followed streams to their hidden springs, and listened to the winds that carried the cries of hawks and the whispers of wolves. The wolves were never far away. At night, their howls rolled down the slopes, echoing through the valley like a chorus. To the adults, those howls were warnings, reminders that danger lurked just beyond the tree line. To the children, they were terrifying lullabies. Mothers told stories of wolves stealing into barns, of glowing eyes at the edge of firelight. Fear became a tradition passed from one generation to the next. But Lina, unlike most, felt something else. When she heard the howls, her chest ached not with fear, but with a strange curiosity. She wanted to know what the wolves were saying. Were they calling each other home? Were they mourning, or were they celebrating a successful hunt? The land itself shaped the conflict. This was not gentle country. The winters were long, food was scarce, and survival demanded sacrifice. The wolves hunted elk and deer, chasing them through snowfields until the herd grew tired and fell. But sometimes, when prey grew thin, they crept closer to the village, drawn by the scent of livestock penned behind wooden fences. For villagers, each calf or goat lost was a disaster, a hole in the year's survival. For wolves, each kill was the difference between their pups living or starving. It was inevitable that fear grew sharper. Meetings were called in the longhouse. Men spoke of the Alpha, the great dark wolf that led the pack. Tall, broad-shouldered, scarred across the muzzle, the Alpha was said to be clever, watching the village from the shadows. Some swore they had seen it circle the pastures at dusk. Others said it had eyes like fire. To them, killing this wolf meant killing fear itself. Yet not everyone agreed. The elder of the village, an old woman who rarely spoke, remembered a time when wolves and people kept their distance, when fences and respect were enough. She warned that killing the Alpha would not end the howls, it would unleash chaos. A pack without a leader, she said, was unpredictable, desperate, and far more dangerous. Her words, though wise, were drowned out by the rumble of fear. Lin listened to these debates from the shadows, clutching a carved wooden toy her grandfather had made. She watched the lines on her father's face deepen as he spoke of protecting the herd. She saw her mother's worry as she whispered about food for the winter. To them, wolves were thieves. To Lin, they were something else, neighbors whose story had never been told. Beyond the village, in a cave hidden deep in the forest, the Alpha wolf lived with its pack. The cave smelled of pine needles and old stone. Inside, the Alpha's mate nursed 3 pups, their fur soft and gray, their eyes still clouded with youth. The Alpha brought food each night, haunches of deer, scraps of rabbit, even the carcass of a stag brought down after a long, grueling chase. He licked the pups clean, nuzzled them close, and lay watchful at the cave's mouth. To the wolves, the world was simple: hunt, protect, survive. To the villagers, the world was fragile. One season of scarcity could mean death. Between them stretched a gulf of misunderstanding. Both fought for family, both claimed the right to live, and in the middle stood Lin, a child with the courage to look past fear and see the truth. This was the stage a village clinging to survival, a pack ruled by an Alpha, and a child who dared to question the old stories. The snow would fall heavier soon, food would grow scarcer, and choices would become harsher. Every path led to a confrontation that no one could avoid. The night of the decision was coming. The torches were already being prepared. The first time Lin saw the Alpha up close, the world narrowed to breath and snow. Dusk had thinned into the quiet blue hour when colors lose their names. She had trailed a string of hoofprints along the creek, 2 parallel grooves, splayed edges, and elk driven hard. The tracks cut across willow thickets and vanished into a saddle between ridges. There, the forest seemed to hold its breath. A shape lifted from shadow, the Alpha. Taller than any dog she had seen, chest-deep shoulders, rolling like coiled rope under winter coat. A crescent scar ran across his muzzle, pale against the dark. In his jaws hung the torn flank of an elk. He paused, one paw raised, listening. The wind shifted. Lin flattened behind a fallen spruce, heartbeat loud in her ears. Fear came first, like cold water down the spine. Every story, every warning, rushed back at once. Don't run, don't scream, don't meet the eyes. She kept still, hands tight on the bark. The wolf's ears flicked, scanning the timberline. Then, with a low rumble so soft it was almost a purr, he stepped past her hiding place and vanished along a game trail that skirted the village pastures. Curiosity pushed back against terror. Lin followed, counting her breaths, placing each foot where his had fallen. Through a notch in the trees, she saw them, the den, a shallow cave mouth curtained with hanging roots. The Alpha's mate ribcage, fine as a woven basket. 3 pups tumbling over one another until the meat touched the earth and they stilled, noses quivering. The Alpha did not eat. He circled them once, watchful, then took his place at the cave's lip, a dark statue carved against the snow glow. The scene cracked her idea of monsters. This was not savagery, it was a family ritual. The pups fed in short, frantic bursts, lifting their heads to check the Alpha's posture as if it were a clock that kept them alive. Lin noticed details no one in the village ever spoke about, the way the alpha angled his body to block wind from the cave, how he licked frost from a pup's muzzle, the steady sweep of his gaze down toward the pasture fences, alert measuring distance intent on staying unseen. Then she saw something else, a separate trail fresh and straight, leading from the den toward the edge of the fields. It wasn't Wolf. The strides were long, the boot tread deep. Human. Someone had been here. Her stomach sank. Trap's bait. She followed the sign until a faint metallic glint broke under a drift wire twisted around a spring jaw half buried. A snare set low. She pressed the snow back carefully, hands numb, and stepped away. She did not touch it. She had heard the elder's warning, never tamper with traps you can't safely disarm. Mark it. Tell the adults. Tell the ranger if one could be reached before the storm. By the time she returned to the den, the alpha had risen. Down in the pasture, cattle shuffled inside fences, heads dark against the pale. The distance between wild and tame was a single hillside, and the fence line weathered sagging low in two places where snow load had pushed it down. No wonder fear ran so hot in the village. The fence made promises it couldn't keep. A snap rolled through the trees, not loud, but wrong. The alpha's head snapped toward the sound. The pups froze mid-chew. The mate crept forward, ears broomed, body low. Another snap. Woodwire Lin eased toward the noise, keeping the den at her back so the wolves could see her hands. At the grove's edge, a sapling bent under a set spring. A lure, a strip of hide, twitched like a live thing where wind touched it. Movement behind her, the alpha had followed. Not rushing, not threatening, simply there between den and danger. His presence filled the clearing the way weather does. For a long moment, Lin and the alpha stood with the trap between them, 2 points on either end of a line someone else had drawn. She had the oddest thought he knows this is meant for him. The wind swung again, carrying the smell of iron and creosote from the pasture fence. The alpha lifted his head to it, reading the world. Then he turned not toward the low spots in the fence, not toward the cattle downwind, instead into a seam of timber that joined the creek's cut. He trotted that path deliberately, pausing at intersections to scrape his forepaws, lay scent a living signpost. When he reached the shallow draw that would carry sound, he tipped back his head and howled. Not the long valley-sweeping anthem of night, but something clipped, patterned call and response. From far up the ridge, a second voice answered. The pack Lin realized was moving. He was guiding them away from the village. This, more than anything, collapsed the distance between fear and recognition. The alpha wasn't just avoiding humans, he was teaching avoidance, keeping his family alive by drawing a map around danger. Decision rose in Lin like heat. She could not drag snares from the forest or build stronger fences by herself, but she could collect proof that the wolves hunted wild prey, and proof that human traps, not wolf teeth, had come closest to breaking the boundary. She could show the elder her father anyone who would listen. She worked quickly before the light bled out. She found the elk's torn hide where the pack had fed earlier cloven hoofprints surrounding a churned patch of snow. Drag marks leading downhill, no cattle sign anywhere near. She noticed hair snagged in a brake of willow, coarse hollow guard hairs unmistakably deer. She folded a tuft into the pocket of her coat as if it were a petition. At the pasture edge, she measured the fence sag with her arm, a gap high enough for calves to nose through and low enough for coyotes to jump without effort. Night pressed in, and with it, the old fear testing the door. As she turned to leave, a soft crunch behind her tightened every muscle. She turned slowly. The alpha stood 30 paces away, head level, breath silvering. Between them lay a boundary neither would cross. "I see you," she whispered words turning to smoke. "I'll tell them." Something changed in his posture. Nothing dramatic. A small unwinding, a lowering of the tail ears, angling to the neutral plane. Not trust exactly. Recognition. He blinked, then slid back into shadow, soundless as falling ash. She reached the village as torches flared in the square and men gathered around a milk crate of rusted traps and spools of wire. Her father's jaw was set hard. Beside him, the elder's gaze searched the tree line like she expected the mountain to answer. Lin stepped into the circle of firelight with snow on her boots and proof in her pocket. "Wait," she said, voice steadying as she spoke. "We're looking the wrong direction." The murmurs rose. Someone lifted a trap, metal teeth flashing. "The only direction is up," he said, jerking his chin toward the ridges. Lin shook her head. "Up there is a family. Down here is a broken fence." And there, she pointed toward the dark line of the creek, someone set snares. Silence fell, the way snow does soft complete. Her father turned confusion warring with anger. The elder stepped closer. "Show us," she said. Behind them, far away on the ridge, a short patterned howl stitched the night together and then faded. Not a threat. A warning for wolves to keep their distance. Lin closed her fingers around the tuft of deer hair and felt the shape of a choice forming hers and the village's. The following weeks pressed down on the village like an iron weight. Snow fell heavier, sealing paths, slowing wagons, burying fences until their tops barely showed. Food grew tighter. Barns stacked with hay shrank each day, woke meat hooks emptied one by one. Fear, when mixed with hunger, grows teeth of its own. The men spoke louder, the women whispered sharper, and the children slept lighter, listening for howls. Yet Lin carried something none of them did proof. The tuft of deer hair, the hoofprint sketches in her notebook, the memory of the alpha pulling his pack away instead of closer. She showed her father first. He frowned, rough thumb rolling the guard hairs between calloused fingers. "Deer," he admitted. But a deer killed by what? And what about the snares? He didn't say she lied. But doubt is heavy. He put the hair back into her palm as if it were too small to lift the village's fear. She didn't give up. With the elder's help, Lin began recording each howl she heard, short-clipped, patterned. The elder taught her to note wind direction, moon phase, snow depth. Data, the old woman said, is what fear cannot argue with. Together, they traced howls to routes circling wide of the village. Not once did the wolves cross fence lines while the howls guided them. Meanwhile, the alpha's pack faced their own trials. Elk grew scarce. Snow crust hardened, slicing tender pads. One pup limped from frostbite. The mate chewed ice to soothe the wound. Lin, hidden on a ridge, watched the alpha return, night after night, with scraps small enough to vanish in the pups' mouths. Hunger etched them thin, but still they lived. Survival was no luxury. It was a gamble fought daily. Lin began to feel a strange kinship. She too collected scraps, notes, sketches, fragments of proof. She too carried them home to feed an idea: coexistence. But danger sharpened. One evening, as villagers hauled wood to shore up sagging fences, a cry broke from the pasture. A calf had slipped through the weakened rails, drawn to the meadow beyond. By the time they reached it, snow already churned with tracks. Hoofprints crossed by paw prints. Fear surged. "The wolves are here!" Torches lit. Shouts scattered. Lin forced her way forward. The calf was down but not torn. Its leg trapped in a collapsed drift, twisted, broken. The paw prints did circle nearby, but never touched the calf. Instead, they looped, retreated, vanished toward the ridge. The wolves had come close, yes, but they had chosen not to strike. She shouted above the panic, "Look, they didn't kill it. The snow did." For a moment, the crowd faltered, but fear is stubborn. A man raised the twisted calf's limp head and spat. Next time, they won't hesitate. Back in the square, tempers flared. The traps came out again, metal jaws gleaming. The elder argued for patience. Lin added, her voice trembling but loud. Some shook their heads. Others listened uneasy. The divide deepened. That night, Lin stood by her window lantern dim. Across the valley, the Alpha howled, not the clipped guide call, but a long mournful cry that hung like smoke in the air. She pressed her palms to the glass, whispering into the cold, "Stay away, please." The trials worsened when disease swept through the cattle barn. Nothing deadly, but enough to sicken milk cows. Lower yields cut into the winter's survival margin. Fear turned to blame. If we didn't spend so much time worrying about wolves, maybe we'd watch our herd better, one villager muttered. Lin overheard. Every problem, no matter its cause, bent back to wolves. Even nature seemed to test her resolve. A storm hammered the valley winds, ripping shingles, snow burying doors. Lin's family huddled inside, lanterns guttering. Between gusts, she heard it faint whimpering, muffled by distance. Against orders, she slipped into her coat, pulled the hood tight, and opened the door. The storm clawed at her face, nearly toppling her. She followed the sound, stumbling through drifts, until a shadow moved, small, gray, trembling. One of the wolf pups. It must have strayed from the den, blown downhill by the storm. Its eyes were wide, body rigid with cold. For a heartbeat, Lin stood frozen. Every tale told her to run. But another voice rose. The elders, "Data is what fear cannot argue with." And what stronger proof than this? The wolves had not come to raid. They had lost one of their own. She dropped to her knees, kept her hands open, voice soft. "Go home," she whispered, though the pup could not understand. Still, something in her tone eased its panic. It staggered, sniffed, then bolted uphill, tail low, vanishing into white. Lin exhaled so hard her lungs ached. Proof enough, wolves were fighting the storm, same as them. By morning, the storm broke. In the village, roofs sagged under weight, fences splintered. People cursed wolves, though none had appeared. Lin, exhausted, told the elder of the pup. The old woman nodded slowly. Sometimes trials come not to break us, but to show us who we stand with. The bond between Lin and the wolves was not friendship, it was recognition. She saw their struggle as mirror to her own. Each day she collected signs. Each night she prayed the villagers would see them too. Yet every sunrise brought new doubts, new anger, new whispers. The greatest trial came one dawn when the Alpha himself limped into view. Lin spotted him from the ridge leg, bleeding, caught by a hunter's bullet that had only grazed. He moved slow, careful not to show weakness near the den. She wanted to run to him to help, but she knew better. A wounded wolf is danger incarnate. Still from her distance, she saw him settle, lick the wound, push himself back to his feet, and return to his pack without falter. Strength was his trial. Witness was hers. And though the gulf between them remained wide, a thread stretched across it, frail, invisible, but unbroken. The night it all broke open began like any other winter evening, a blue hush settling over the valley, breath ghosting in the air, lanterns pricking the dark like small, stubborn stars. But high on the ridge, the wind had a different plan. It raked the cornices and combed the pines until the mountain's skin hummed with tension, until the snowpack, layer upon layer of storms, held together more by habit than by strength. Lin was awake, pencil in hand, mapping the day's howls the way sailors once mapped constellations. The elder had taught her the pattern for avoid and for regroup, the clipped calls the Alpha used to steer his pack around danger. Tonight, a new shape cut the air, a staccato rhythm, quick and close, vibrating through the walls before her ears could claim it. Not a hunt song, not a territory claim. A warning. She lifted the window latch. Wind needled her face. The call came again, short, urgent, right above the pasture. 3 beats, a pause, 2 more. The Alpha was below the high ridge, not above it, downwind of the village where sound would carry. He wasn't talking to wolves alone. Across the square, a bell hung from a cedar beam used for fires, floods lost children. Lin pulled on her boots, grabbed her coat, and flew out the door. Snow squealed underfoot. Lanterns yawed past like moored ships. She ran for the rope and rang it with both hands, the clang slicing through the village. Doors banged open. Faces spilled into the cold, startled, angry. What is it? Where's the fire? Who's hurt? The ridge, Lin said, breathless. Listen. At first they heard nothing but wind. Then the valley seemed to lean. A low, distant growl deepened until the earth itself sounded restless. The elder's head snapped up. Cornice, she said, the east face. Before anyone could answer, a new sound broke from the tree-line hooves, dozens of them pounding. A shadow surged out of the dark, an elk herd, eyes rolling, white breath, blasting steam barreling straight for the sagging fence at the pasture's edge. Behind them, ghosts flickered between trunks. The wolves. The men grabbed for rifles, for torches, for the iron logic that had always fit neatly into their hands. Predators chase. We stop them. Wait, Lin shouted, and the word whipped away in the wind. The elk hit the fence like a tidal wave. Rails cracked, posts splintered. Cattle bawled in panic, surging against barn doors. The first shots cracked bright mouths of fire in the blue dark. Then the pattern Lin had mapped for weeks announced itself in motion. The wolves weren't driving the elk into the village. They were skimming the herd's flank in a wide crescent arc, turning bodies, bending momentum, shouting in a language of sound and motion. The Alpha ran point, angling his path to press the elk east away from the barns and downslope toward a swale that would bleed their speed. 2 younger wolves darted at the rear feints, not strikes, nipping air, never touching flesh. Another ran far ahead, silhouetted for a moment against the snow, calling with that clipped pattern Lin had heard through the wall. The herd tilted. The lead cows veered. One by one, the bodies behind them followed, as if the wolves had become a living leash. Instead of breaking straight through the pasture, the elk funneled into the swale, stumbled, slowed and flared past the village in a river of breathing muscle. Someone lowered a rifle. Someone else swore softly, not in anger, but in awe. A shot cracked from the far end of the pasture, late, panicked. The bullet buzzed into the swale, harmless among legs and snow. The sound alone was enough. The Alpha spun, found its source, and froze. Through his scope, a man sighted again, finger whitening on the trigger. Lin saw the line forming Gunwolf Grave and stepped into it without thinking, arms wide. "Stop!" she screamed. "They're turning the herd! Get back!" her father shouted, but the command came edges first, dulled by fear, and by the sight in front of him, a child between a rifle and a shadow. The elder's voice cut cleaner. "Down, all of you. Listen." That was when the mountain let go. The growl swelled, split, and became a roar as the east cornice collapsed under its own weight. Snow tore free in a slab, then shattered into powder, then into a cloud that rolled like surf down a couloir. It jumped an old moraine and became a white wall, cold and heavy as a falling roof. The sound crushed thought to size small. The herd bolted at the change in tone, surging now away from both village and storm. The wolves vanished at once, slipping into dark seams in the trees. The village held, still held, breath, held time until the Alpha reappeared on the pasture's high side, not running from the slide, but running along it parallel to its path. Head tilted as if reading a script none of them could see. He broke left, barked that clipped code 3 beats. A pause, 2, and the pack answered from beyond the ridge, shepherding themselves into safe ground. The avalanche's main tongue thundered past the old logging road, spilled into the upper meadow, and slammed to a grinding halt against a stand of willow in a hissing exhale. A secondary wave sloughed off toward the pasture, smaller but fast, a gray tongue licking down the slope. It hammered a section of fence flat and spilled into the low spot, where kids sledded in gentler weather. The low spot where Lin stood. Her father saw it first and ran. The elder grabbed the bell rope and rang it again, this time as prayer. Snow hits not as a sheet, but as a body. The first shove knocked Lin to one knee, the second drove her into powder up to her waist. White filled the night. Sound vanished under the hiss. Hands seized her shoulders, her father's, and hauled until cold air shocked her lungs. Together, they staggered up slope, slipping, clawing, stumbling toward the barn. Movement to their right, a dark shape coursing the slide's edge, not caught by it, but carving its rim and turning back, hemming them toward the higher ground where the snow was shallow. The Alpha. He didn't come close. He didn't need to. His presence pulled at their path the way a riverbank pulls at water shaping the flow. Lin reached the barnyard just as the secondary slide spent itself in a last harmless sigh, leaving a new shoulder of snow where grass had been. Silence smothered everything. Then sound returned in pieces, the creak of settling roofs, a cow's bewildered lowing, the faint jingle of a dropped bit hitting a post. The village turned as one toward the ridge where the main debris piled in the upper meadow, toward the lightless body of the mountain that had almost moved through them. No one spoke. The Alpha stood above the pasture chest, heaving steam pouring from his jaws. He tipped his head once, not to the moon or to the dark, but to the village. Not a bow, not submission. An acknowledgement as simple and undramatic as a nod over a fence line between neighbors who had survived the same storm. Then the night snapped back into human time. People ran. Men and women threw their shoulders under doors to keep them from buckling. Others shoveled snow away from barn vents. Older children led stoky cows to higher stalls. Small ones gathered the scattered rails of fence like driftwood for a new fire. Lin's father, breath still ragged, looked down at his daughter's snow-streaked face and did something he had not done since the howls began echoing nightly. He smiled, fierce and shaking. "You were right," he said. He didn't mean about everything, not yet, but he meant it about tonight. At the pasture's edge, the man with the rifle lowered it all the way, shame washing his cheeks darker than cold. He stared into the swale, where elk tracks braided, and then arrowed east, far from barns, far from calves. The elder put a hand on his arm. "Sometimes," she said, "a thing you fear becomes the thing that saves you, because fear taught it to keep its distance." As the village stabilized, Lin slipped back to the fence gap the avalanche had chewed flatter. On the other side, the Alpha paced the new snow line, testing it, reading where the mountain now ended and where it had spilled. He stopped where the fence sagged lowest, the same weakness she had measured with her arm, and glanced once toward the cattle. There it was, again, the decision visible as posture. He turned away. Lin felt a pressure at her side and found her father beside her eyes, on the same line between wild and tame. "We thought the wolves were a hole in our winter," he said. "Turns out our fence was." He brushed snow off the top rail and looked down at her. "Tomorrow we raise it, properly, with posts that won't sag." He hesitated, tasting the next words as if they might change the air. "And we call the ranger about snares." Tonight, Lin said, surprising herself. "Snares don't wait for morning." He nodded. Across the pasture, the elder had already dispatched 2 boys with lanterns to check the upper path for anyone caught in the slide. A woman began an inventory, voice clipped and steady. Chimneys good. South barn intact. Head count now. From the ridge came one last wolf sound, a soft line threaded into the darkness. It wasn't the clipped warning of before, nor the long anthem of possession. It was something else, low, an even call and answer, muted by distance, a settling note, a boundary redrawn. The villagers gathered at the square as the bell stilled. The man with the rifle set it down on the crate of traps. Then, after a moment, lifted the crate and carried it inside the longhouse out of the snow. Not thrown away, not consecrated, put aside. Lin and her father made for the east trail with a lantern and a length of bright cloth to flag any snare they found. At the bend above the creek, the world had changed shape. New mounds, new hollows, the old path erased. They reached the grove where Lin had seen the lure under the bent sapling. The snare still lay half-buried iron teeth, rimed with ice. Her father knelt and stared at it for a long time, then stood and tied the cloth to a branch. "We'll fetch the ranger at first light," he said. "He'll know how to pull these without catching anything we don't mean to." Wind hissed the branches. In that close quiet, Lin felt the night settle into a new balance, as if the avalanche had not only remade the hill, but had cut away through old stories too. She thought of the alpha pacing the line of the pups that needed his breath, of the elk herd flowing east, because wolves had written their motion into the snow. She thought of the bell rope burning her palms, and the weight of her father's hands dragging her from the slide, and how both salvations had hurt in the moment they happened. They walked back through a village moving with purpose, the kind that follows a scare and precedes a change. Someone hammered braces against the weakest barn. Someone else sketched a new fence plan in char on the longhouse wall, higher rails, tight weave wire, lower down a reinforced gate on the north side, where elk habitually funneled. The elder sat by the fire with a ledger on her knees, writing a careful line at the top. Tonight, the wolves turned the herd. The avalanche did not touch the barns. Lin paused at the door and looked toward the ridge. For a heartbeat, the alpha stood clear against the sky. He neither howled nor stared her down. He simply lifted his nose, tasted the wind, and sank back into the trees, a shadow joining shadows, a story joining the forest's longer telling. Later, when the village finally slept, the valley held a new kind of quiet, not the brittle hush of dread, but the heavy, restful weight that comes after work well done and danger deferred. Somewhere out there, pups pressed their bellies to full bellies. Somewhere in here, calves leaned into their mothers, breathing milk-sour steam. Between them ran a line stronger than a fence, a lesson the mountain had written for all of them in the language of snow.